Yes, Patrick. You can't see it, but I'm shaking my head no.
It's a valid. It's very valid. God, that movie. Hey, everybody. This is the TBD Bobcast. Bobcast, you, me, Bob, this Bob, Bill Bob, Jim Bob on that Bobcast.
I'm Bobcat Etienne, and this is Bobcat Patrick, and we'll be your Bobcats today on TBD Bobcat.
TBD Podcast. This week we are covering, obviously, I'm Patrick, and that's Etienne. Bob.
We're covering ourselves. This isn't about Citizen Kane. Don't be misled by the bros bread at the start of this. This is about ourselves.
This is about glorying in what we are. The glorious, beautiful, angelic flowers of the field. Lilies of the swamp, as it were. Which is kind of what our actual topic today, Citizen Kane, is all about. Is glorying in your own slightly oiled Grecian nudity for an eternity in South Florida. Discussing Citizen Kane today. I think it was the first time watching it for both of us.
See, you're presuming that I've actually watched this.
This is true.
And I haven't just fantasized about a sentient candy cane that escaped from Poland in 1939, Nazi invasion.
Excellent. Though it also would have been great as, a subversive candy cane made in Soviet Russia that was,
that would be even better.
Going traitor to the U.S., trying to defect to the West. A spy
or if it was one of those, double deep things where he's pretending to defect to the U.S. but actually still working for Russia. He is both the candy cane that has been forged into the hammer and the sickle.
He comes from behind. But no, I mean, did you in fact watch it?
Yes.
I was gonna say, I was like, I mean, because I
just listened to Russia's Xanadu on repeat for 2 hours.
I'm not gonna say that's not an equivalent experience. I feel like the film might have been a little bit drier, but I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely could have done with Russia's Xanadu through the whole opening, the
montage newsreel.
Yeah. Hands down, my least favorite part of the movie was that.
Yeah, it was kind of awkwardly done, and I think that part of it was that they didn't really know how to blend the two styles as well. And it was very much like a period newsreel, which was super cool.
I'm not saying that there's not things that I didn't appreciate about it. I mean, it definitely set the tone, gave you the whole background in 15 minutes for what you were going to be getting into, which is fine. But yeah, it definitely fell short. And yes, I know they needed it to have the whole jack off being man, find out about this rosebud thing. This film, basically glosses over what everybody knows, but we must understand the man.
In order to publish his obituary, which didn't make a terrible lot of sense to me, but I mean, I definitely get the argument, no, we want to know what this means so we can run tabloid, because, hey, yellow journalism, which he created. Thank you, William Randolph.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Randolph Kane, whatever the fuck
Charles Foster
Kane.
Which I also love the fact that his middle name is Foster. And in with him being a foster child.
Yeah, that's in many.
I part of me wonders if he just did that as a fuck you, or if that was his actual birth thing. Because much of the movie is him just being fuck you, Thatcher. You're not my real dad. I don't like you.
I'm gonna beat you with my sled. But it was the important sled. I'm sorry. I mean, that could definitely be true, especially with how much of fuck you, finger in the eye. I guess I'll give you all my newspapers. I really did enjoy a lot of it, though. I really liked it.
I did too. And
there were definitely moments in it that were awkward.
Yeah. No, as a complete piece, I definitely think it has its problems, but for what it was, I enjoyed it, and it's also nice, especially, I mean, I don't want to be harping on this too much and going back to it that often, but like, compared to watching Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's nice to watch a film that is quote-unquote classic that actually has some semblance of being a quote-unquote classic.
Well, and just great fucking performances all around. Like, that's something I'll definitely give them credit for. I thought that there were some writing issues that were in part due to the fact that it was the Mercury Theater. It was a bunch of theater fucking actors and theater writers who, like,
the other thing, too, is, like, it was mostly the two dudes, fucking Orson Welles and Herman Mech, whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And like,
Herman Melville. I know.
That's why there's Moby Dick references throughout the entire film.
And the entire interlude of, if I were to write a book about whales, but Mr. Kane, you run a newspaper, but if I were to run a newspaper about whales, the first issue, headline, The Narwhal.
And no, I mean the creature, not the part of the UK.
Yes. No, we can have a supplement about the country.
Use whales to analyze whales as a side by side
metaphor. Yeah. They were definitely. I was really, really impressed, honestly, with how modern the camera work was.
Oh yeah,
especially in the quickness of the shots. Like, they definitely had occasional, like, super long, slow set shots that were beautiful in the way that they were done. They were expressing, like, that complete idea. But, like, all of the crazy stuff with, like, zooming over things, like, coming in, like, crane shots, like, through
I think you're talking specifically about the Susan Alexander Kane bits when they're going to see her, and it goes in through the top, down.
Just throughout, they work wonderful angles and wonderful panning stuff, like the stuff in the Opera House with all the different, like, crazy pans. They were really expressing this, they were able to express so much of the texture of the moment with that photography work. And especially considering the era in which it was, 1941, like, that was, like, really, really, really daring and bold for the period.
Sometimes I feel like I give black and white movies too much of a pass, because I know what they had to work with, and, like, the technology of that cinematic era is just so much different. And, like, it relied so much more on, like, getting those clever shots and, like, what the story was and actual acting, as opposed to today where it's like, meh, special effects. Yeah. This is realer than real life. Meh.
Higher def than human vision. But, I mean, I definitely feel that there are some things that in modern filmmaking have become much clearer and more precise and more refined because they've had, 70 years now to refine it since this came out.
And that's part of why this is viewed as a classic and such a cinematic masterpiece is so much of it what Citizen Kane did to push the envelope to, be like, hey, let's look at it this way. Let's use this technique. And really the pioneering effect that it had on the industry, which, regardless of what I think of the film as a whole, I can definitely respect.
Oh yeah, kind of a la 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I detest, but the camera work and what it did for cinema was really, really important.
Can't let you detest that, Patrick.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't let you say that on this podcast, Dave. I'm afraid I'm turning off the oxygen, Dave. I'm not Dave. But and that's not to say I detested Citizen Kane. I actually quite enjoyed most of it. But definitely was one of those movies that, like, landmark changed the way that things were being shot. And even if there were those weird, like, awkward moments that weren't fully put together and they obviously assumed would come through because of the theater background, there's a bribe that goes on really early in the movie, and I can't remember who it's the two people talking to. It's like, what are you doing here? Oh, just for Mr. Kane. Oh, of course. And, like, you can see the hands move, but you have to be watching the body language of them shifting. And, like, I've done a bunch of theater acting, and I was like, oh, you kind of shifted and cheated, but the hand motion of you actually handing over the cash is under the wall. Like, it's invisible. Mm-hmm. So that's really not clear to the audience. That isn't, like, clearly illuminated. And then there was moments that were just way too ham-fisted, like, clearly illuminated, like, good thrashing is what he needs, and that's why he's being raised by the bank. Like, zoom in close up on, it wasn't a zoom in close up, but it was a close up on her face. Like, that was one where I was like, way too fucking heavy handed. Like, you came at that shit with a sledgehammer, and you needed, like, the ball peen and the chisel. Like,
I mean, I agree that it may have been too heavy-handed, but I think it was also a point that kind of needed to be made, was that they weren't necessarily explicitly monsters that were, like, in this to, like, make money and, like, sell out their son.
No.
Like, part of it was legitimately, like, I am worried for his health. I am getting him to a place that will be better for him.
Yes, but they could have also had that be more apparent through the way that they shot that. Which they didn't. They instead went for the father being this kind of like weak, nebbish character who's dominated by the wife, but who apparently the rest of the time is violently abusive to the son, which is not super consistent character-wise.
No, I understand that. Thinking back, I think they may have like tried to set him up as like the dysfunctional drunk.
Yeah,
because there's like some awkward like
physicality,
stumbling around and stuff, especially like the first scene within the cabin in Colorado.
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
But, even so, it's also going back to character justification, portraying the character justification.
Yeah. And it's also 1871. Ain't nobody opposed to beating your children.
Oh, yeah.
1871. Yeah. There's no kind of qualms about that.
Even when it came out to an extent, too, like the 40s, they might have been more progressive, but I mean, that would still have been common practice.
It was still legal for teachers to beat your kids. I'm sorry.
Sometimes you paid for it by sending them to Catholic school.
Yes. In fact, millions did. But
we want them to be brought up with good Christian morals and 5 across the ass.
They need to learn. They need to learn that sometimes the Lord giveth, sometimes he taketh away, and sometimes he giveth beatings.
I was going to say, and sometimes the Lord spanketh.
Yeah, no, I mean, equally good principle, I think, at the end of the day. I don't know. Like, I thought that there was a bunch of that stuff that was kind of ham-fisted and a little bit awkward. And there's definitely some of the performances that were just a hair exaggerated, which is why I love that they have at the beginning of the credits. They're like, most of these actors have never been in a movie before. Let's give a shout-out to all of the newcomers. And it was the giant list of people, a bunch of whom were, like, major actors, like Agnes Moorehead, fucking Joseph Cotton. Motherfucking Joseph Cotton. I was so happy to see him, like, the second that his character popped up, I was like, oh shit, Joseph Cotton. I love Joseph Cotton.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it was like Orson Welles and list of chuckle fucks.
Well, I mean, which is why I thought it was funny that Orson Welles was at the end of every list. Like, because it was such a, like, almost Charles Foster Kane kind of a thing of like, yes, let's applaud all of these others, and now me, which I know was not actually like the thing. He was mainly a problem drunk. From what I hear, he didn't. I don't think he had like ego problems. I mean, like, I've heard he was a problem drunk for a lot of stuff, but that's kind of also pretty par for the course, doing what he was, doing. But I did really like the fact that they actually, as much as I wanted to actually have a totally, like, coherent accounting of this man's entire life, I love the fact that it wasn't that way. It was all of these vignettes that were all a part of how he became what he was.
Right.
But there was no, like, true progression of he was this is his transformation into this is his transformation into this, because that's not how people are. The transition is so gradual that you can't trace it to a specific spot. And the closest they came was that montage of him with his first wife, where it started with him like loving life, and by the end of it was like, because my will makes it so, because I said it, because I tell people what to think, which was like one of the last lines, and I was like, okay, there was a major shift there that has not been addressed, and they never addressed it in the film.
The very slow moving way. Well, you shouldn't have married a newspaper man. They're worse than sailors.
That line was fucking fantastic. I've never been out this late before. But yeah, I mean, and that was super. I don't know. I enjoyed that method of the storytelling.
Very much so, and like I said, once it moved away from that ending, like, you know, whatever the fuck you want, the newsreel, great man has died, blah, 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 blah. Like, I very much enjoyed the pacing on it for the most part, and like how it was told, that it was very much like, let's go visit with these people that were important to him. Let's hear these, you know, these vignettes, as you put them. Yeah. And, you know, encapsulated events from these individuals that is set through their eyes. Yeah. And like having, yes, they're flashbacks, but like the way that they orchestrated them didn't entirely feel like flashbacks.
No, it was that each individual's slice of who he was and their experience of him, which is just poor, pathetic fuck up.
Well, it's really sad too, because you do definitely get that, yes, he was all about himself from the beginning to an extent, but he also like had a lot of good in him, that he wanted to help people. I mean, the whole like declaration of principles. Yeah. Like, yes, it was kind of bullshit. Yes, it was yellow journalism, but like he still wanted to be a man of the people and like help them and like help them get what they needed.
Well, and I do truly believe that it wasn't always all about him. I mean, he was always a part of the equation, and nothing he did was selfless. But the whole sequence with the second wife, Susan Alexander, Sarah Alexander, whatever the name
No, Susan Alexander.
Was Susan Alexander? I'm terrible with names.
I am too. Together, we're just twice as shitty.
We're almost one whole person. But all of that, which was, there was the point where he realized, like, no, I'm forcing you to do this thing. It isn't for your own good. It's for me, and I'm sorry. Like, when she tries to kill herself, and there's that whole thing. And, like, that hits him. And that's what decides the entire direction of what he does. And it's ill-conceived. Oh, yeah. But it's well-intentioned. And, like, that whole thing where she's like, you've never once given me anything that actually fucking mattered. Right. And that scene, for me, was so much of a, like, I get where she's coming from, but he's also giving you all that he knows how to give. Right. He's trying to give you something that matters because he does care. Right. You don't have that much pain when someone is leaving unless you actually care. And, like, yes, it's also about him. Yes, it's also about his experience. But that's what I loved, was it was the phrasing when she's leaving in that later scene where he's like, please don't go. Yeah. And if he'd said, I need you, as opposed to, you can't do this to me, I think that the scene would have ended a very different way. And that was, I thought, a really subtle, interesting thing about the character there, was that essentially those two phrases would have had the same exact meaning in that situation. But one would have been completely differently interpreted than the other. Right. And the one that he chose was the one that made him alone.
No, I get that, and I could see that to an extent, but I also think that, like, it gotten up to the straw that broke the camel's back. That, like, enough was enough. I'm fucking done. I'm getting out of here for me. Like, this needs to happen. Which great fucking, like, if you need to get out, get the fuck out. Like,
well, the because he is emotionally and in every other way dominating. Right. Because it's,
I mean, the immediately preceding thing to all this was him fucking smacking her across the face. which was the catalyst for her being like, no,
go fuck yourself. Yeah. Which, 100% justified. And it's an interesting... Well, every part of what happens with them. Like, all of the, like, shots that are specifically designed with, like, him towering over here with her with the shadows. All the shadow work, by the way, in the film, just absolutely top-notch. Like, extremely theatrical and fantastic because it focuses you, all of it focused you on whatever specific thing they wanted you looking at. So, like, the reporter's face was, I think, once not in shadow. Almost all the scenes with the reporters, their faces were entirely in shadow because they weren't what it was about.
Right.
And all of the scenes where there was like a mix of light and shadow where it had them, it was about the dialogue, it was about the room around them, it wasn't about them. All of the stuff is perfectly gorgeously lit. The people's faces are dimmed out.
Right.
And that was really interesting to me. And I thought that, again, is something really both strong and unique, influenced by the theater background, but also, which I could definitely imagine, turned off some people at the time.
Yeah, they were very much the vehicle for the story, but they weren't players in the story.
No, they were plot devices.
Yep.
A human MacGuffin. But it was also, I don't know, very, very complex film, but not... I had a teacher in high school who I still respect very much.
Right.
And if you're listening to this, Jeremy, at any point, you're going to have to excuse me, because I know you'll have a very different opinion on this. But it's definitively not the best film ever made.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had a lot of people make that argument to me over the years, and which is part of why I've resisted seeing it, which is something that I do, is that when everybody is like, you've got to see it, it's the most amazing thing ever, you've got to see it, it's the most amazing thing ever.
Oh, yeah.
I usually don't have the same response. And I don't want to have to, like, have them give me the rave review and then 2 days later be like, well, I watched it, so I thought it was bumblecrap for these 12 reasons.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have that same experience, but, like, it definitely, like, builds a hype train, and usually the hype train does not meet. Like, I'm very different flick, but I'm a little bit worried about seeing Mad Max because I still haven't seen it, and I've had all these friends ranting and raving about how good it is, quoting it ad nauseum, and I'm just, like... I may enjoy the film, but I'm pretty sure whatever it is not going to be this great expectation that has been built for it.
Yeah. And you don't want to be the one to have to take that position in the conversation of like, so, I disagree. And I mean, I take that position a lot, so when I can minimize how much I'm like up in my friends' faces with like, I really thought this is bullshit because I'm retentive about production design stuff.
You're stupid. This is stupid. Fuck you.
Yeah, like, I don't mean it to come out this way, but at the end of the day, I wind up being like, who the fuck would want this? Why does anybody like this? And then, but you like it, and I like you, so I don't want to say you're worthless. But yeah. So, I mean, I definitely haven't seen Mad Max yet either. So, I'm going to see it while it's at the $2 theater.
Well, it's actually out on, like, Blu-ray and DVD now.
Oh, it is?
Go buy Mad Max. We of TBD fully endorse this film as a movie that neither of us have actually seen.
So go out and do it and make your own TBD podcast. But get your own name, damn it. Get your own name. You're not as big as us. We're both very large. You have to take our words for it.
I crush you.
I am easily 17 stone. Yes. I can't remember. Stone is like 23 pounds.
I don't know.
Pounds, something like that. Fucking crazy British measurement systems.
Aggressive and vague. We could also measure ourselves by hands.
Excellent. Counterweights. Whatever counterweights we found. Alright, so you're about 13 glasses, an old television, and 3 stools. Okay. Your recliner, a card table, and 2 ceiling fans. Alright. Just need a drum of grape jam and a desk of Cheez-Its. Unusual units of measure. Measure everything in cubits from now on and refuse to specify what kind. We talked about that in an earlier podcast. I feel like we made a joke about that. I don't know. I thought, I don't know. It might have been because I'd had the ending ruined for me. That's his sled. But I found the whole thing building up to that point to be such a, I don't know whether if I'd seen it without having known the ending ahead of time, whether my reaction would have been like it was to the reveal in Lucky Number 11 of, oh shit, that's interesting. Or it would have been my reaction to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was, I got it from the beginning what this was about, yay, yeah. Because they do, fucking breadcrumb it to shit, all the way through that movie. The thing that he's tripping out on and staring at is a snow globe with a little picturesque house covered in snow. And then it cuts to his childhood, and the first shots you see of his childhood is picturesque house covered in snow, him playing in the snow. Right. And, again, I didn't see the movie without having that spoiled, but it was totally one of those things where watching the movie I was like, okay, alright, okay, I get it. See, you're building to it. I get it.
I knew, what Rosebud was because of, reference and parody from other things. Yeah. But, for the movie, for whatever reason, I'd completely put that out of my mind until, the reveal at the end, which was, the best possible scenario. Yeah, no, so I had the entire through line of, what's Rosebud, what's Rosebud, what's Rosebud? I'm going along with him, and, there's the whole, bit with him at the end, too, is, one word can't define a man, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you son of a bitch!
If you gonna do that,
And then I had the whole bit when, it's being chucked into the fire, and...
Maybe one word can redefine everything.
The whole fucking, shit melts away. It's Rosebud. Yeah. And, I was like, duh. Fucking duh.
Yeah. And I mean, again, that was also a very much, this was a thing that I learned in theater school, was specifically the idea of a title being something that totally changes the way you look at everything. It being a single phrase that totally changes how you look at everything. And there was a class where we did these crazy physical theater pieces, and then at the end of it, told the audience the title. Right. And part of that was as an exercise of the fact that at the end you can have one little piece of data that comes in and changes the way the entire rest of it is viewed. And they beautifully did that with the idea of the sled. But it's also a little bit weird that he had a named sled.
It is, and that the name would be Rosebud.
Yeah, which doesn't make much sense for a sled. No. Which was a thing where I was kind of it could have been a new, a total fucking multitude of other things he could have said there, as opposed to Rosebud, meaning the same thing. Right. I long for that life that I left behind of being beaten in the snow by my semi-alcoholic, non-functional father.
I mean, again, going back to that line being super weak, I mean, he clearly wants to stay with them, and he doesn't have, blatant fear of his dad.
No, which is, again, part of why, at that moment I was awkward? You're saying this in front of, the bank man from the city who's taking your son. You didn't discuss this with your son, because that makes lots of fucking sense. And I mean, I can kind of understand the whole idea of, we want to make sure it stays in the family. This way we sign it over to everybody, it stays in the family. The why the bank wanted custody of, a 9-year-old kid, I have no fucking clue. Like, as a bank manager, that wouldn't be my first goal. Like, nah, let's pick up this gold mine. And as a bonus, let's pick up this kid.
I think it was probably one of those things that's not fully explained in the film, but, like, Mr. Thatcher didn't really have family. So I thought he probably wanted, like, an attempt at, like, raising a kid, having a family. And this was his way to do it.
So, let me steal your gold mine, son. And, yeah, let me raise you in the ways of an old school corrupt businessman. Good old boy of Wall Street. They, like, say that at the beginning about fucking Thatcher.
Well,
Thatcher.
I do love that bit when he's signing over the newspaper and everything. And he's like, you know, they're talking about, like, everything you wanted to be, everything you wanted to become. And he's like, I wish I could have become everything that you hate.
Yeah, and then just walks out of the room. I'm like, yeah, no, that's appropriate. I love speaking of Thatcher, I love the portrait work. The theme of all the portraits and the usage of the portraits throughout. Like, the fact that you have this series of scenes where Thatcher's portrait is, like, dominating the room in the Thatcher library.
Right.
And then it cuts to him talking to Bernstein, and Bernstein's room, after Kane's death, is still dominated by essentially the shrine to Kane above the fireplace. And that was something that was really interesting to me, is whose portrait was displayed where in each of the scenes.
Well, it totally makes sense, because I think Bernstein at the end of the day was a good guy, but he was totally a yes man. And, like, he stuck by Kane, he was defined by Kane. So having very much his presence still after death, kind of over the shoulder surveying Bernstein, was very appropriate.
Yeah, well, it was so. I mean, Bernstein for me was totally summed up by the conversation that he had with Leland. Jedediah Leland, which is the most awkward fucking name ever written.
Something about me and, you know, other works, I was surprised that Jedediah was not a Mennonite.
Going back to the Amish theme that seems to keep coming up. But that conversation where he's going, so weren't they as loyal to the Chronicles policies as they are now to ours?
Right.
And he's like, well, they're just people.
Yeah.
They've got a job. They're doing their job. They're going to do it. They just happen to be the best in the business, which is why we needed them. And it's that wonderful moment of him being like, they're just people. It's a job.
Yeah.
And that's really what it was to Bernstein. Was that it was like, no, you do your job. You do it faithfully.
Right.
You follow the direction.
Right.
And he followed Kane's direction, and it always served him right. I mean, at the end, Bernstein's still chairman of the board.
Right.
Of massive, massive conglomerate.
Yep.
Even if, you know, the newspaper empire fell, he still owns all the other concerns that he's owned the entire fucking movie and has expanded upon. And especially with the basis of it being, you know, essentially a fable about William Randolph Hearst, all of his concerns in the timber industry, all of his concerns in gold, all of his concerns in everything else. Like,
they kind of went through all of that at the beginning with the whole, you know, death montage movie. And, like, you know, he was in this, and he was in, you know, child labor and burning toys and making churches.
Sinking Titanics. Which I definitely thought of was like, is this just going to be like a William Mulholland St. Francis Dam, like the Titanic sinks his hopes?
Yeah, I'm glad there wasn't more narration, especially after the connection with Orson Welles.
Oh, God.
War of the Worlds and...
Yeah. Well, the fact that it started with I'm spacing on the company name. Like, because they were a theater company that then also did the radio plays. Right. And it, like, was produced by the radio play company. Which also explained there were a bunch of writing moments that obviously they hadn't readjusted from writing for radio plays. Where it was like, here, let's walk to the window and see. And I'm like, you can walk to the window and we'll see. Physically.
Yeah.
Because there's a camera and not mic.
Right.
But, I'm very glad that it didn't continue. I was worried that there were going to be, like, periodic newsreels throughout, like, those new movies like Badass. I don't know if you saw Badass.
No.
It's terrible. It stars Danny Trejo. There's a whole bunch of it that's just, like, weird, random, like,
for sure,
social media stuff.
But I thought it would have been kind of funny if Orson Welles had narrated this entire thing that he was also in, that he directed, that he'd written.
Michael Foster Kane, greatest man of our times, rises to a new day filled with challenges. What will this day hold for Michael Foster Kane? Charles. I keep calling him Michael.
I know. It's okay.
I don't know why. I hate names. I'm bad with them. I hate everything. I always hate everything.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
This is all for you, Mike. All for you. You'll always be mine, Mr. King.
Is there anything I should know about that?
Well, I mean, I know I told you I was taking your last name a couple of weeks ago, but you might have some other men in the market. Huh?
You son of a bitch. If this wasn't your glass, I would shatter it.
I would beat you. But it's impolite to break a man's cup on his head inside of his own house. I follow the ancient Viking laws of hospitality to a T.
Oh, God.
Which definitely Kane did. The fucking Joseph Cotton thing. I was laughing my ass off because I've actually done this a couple of times. Not to the same degree, but the thing where he's like, whatever, after he moved down south, whatever he calls that place, Shangri-La.
Yeah.
I forget what the second one is, but the last one was Sloppy Joe's. What is it?
I mean, I'm joking.
Oh, you caught me. I knew the name the whole time. Xanadu. I was just like, you old fuck up. He did the best old rambling guy I think I've ever seen on film in that scene. That was just...
Well, I mean, I think the point is that he does very much still have his faculties about him. He's just trying to enjoy himself in the shit show that he's in.
He's bored as fuck. He's poor. He's an alcoholic.
Right.
They won't let him have his cigars.
Right.
And he's like, man, just shit. Joseph fucking Cotton, man. I was so happy to see him. I don't see enough shit with Joseph Cotton in it.
I don't know that I've seen anything besides Citizen Kane, which I may or may not have watched.
Speaking of Alfred Hitchcock, Joseph Cotton did a wonderful Alfred Hitchcock film called, I think it's My Uncle Charlie.
Okay.
Which is, he plays a serial killer who's like laying low after his latest killing with his family and his niece, who's named after him and is named Charlie after him. And his niece discovers that he's a serial killer. And it's the rising tension of them trying to figure out what they're gonna do about it.
Sounds pretty interesting.
The niece and the uncle.
Right.
It also has Hume Cronin as a supporting role. I don't know if you know Hume Cronin. Amazing old school character actor. Been in fucking tons of stuff. He was in the original version of Djinn. Great two-person play that they made a film version of. God, who was that? Who played opposite him? It was the woman he eventually married. But it's an old man and an old woman in an old folks' home. Mm-hmm. And it's the two of them drinking gin, and the old man teaching the woman how to play gin. Mm. And it's a series of like 6 or 7 games of gin that they're playing, and she wins every one. And he slowly like loses it more and more the more she wins, because he's like, oh, let me teach you this game, There's a lot of strategy, you're not going to win the first time, because, I've been playing gin for gin.
Yeah.
Gin.
Son of a bitch, beginner's luck, and then it just moves beyond
just
that.
Beats his ass.
Oh, yeah.
And they did a new version with Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore.
Okay.
Which was actually quite good.
Okay.
I like the Hume Cronin better, but only just because I have nostalgia for old things, and I love Hume Cronin.
Is that why you go to old folks' homes and hang around and pretend like you're their grandsons?
They believe me because they don't know no better. play bocce ball for a few hours. Oh, fucking bocce ball. That was actually, did I ever tell you about playing bocce ball with the old people and getting like my ass whipped by the blind old lady?
I mean, it stands to reason, but you haven't explicitly told me. Yeah, I know.
But I mean, that was what was remarkable. I was visiting my grandpops. If you remember, in the previous couple of podcasts ago, I think we talked about how I was going to see Ian McKellen's one-man show, and I was stuck in Wisconsin with the family. One of the things that I did during that was I spent a few days wandering around the old folks' home with my grandfathers, now deceased. And he was kind of this weird, like, socialite of the old folks' home, and was not totally coherent, except when he was playing his games, and then he was, like, sharp as a tack and, like, totally on it. And one of the games we ended up playing was they all got together, like, 3 times a week for bocce ball, like, indoor bocce ball, which is essentially... God, it's like a combination of croquet and something. Basically, you're all trying to roll your balls towards a target at the end of the room, and you're trying to knock your balls further with later balls, and you're trying to knock other people's balls out of the way. And the people who won, and apparently they win every single fucking game, was a team of this little old blind lady and her homie. And it was the sniper and the spotter. And the blind lady was the sniper. And the spotter would go, okay, 30 feet down, 20 degrees to the right. Okay, she'd turn. Perfectly, like, send your ball flying off, and you're fucked. And I just watched this pair just clean up the entire thing, you know? And I thought about it, and I was like, perhaps the stories of the Zatoichi are true.
They just forgot about the spotter part.
He just needs a guy. There's a dude to your right.
It would almost be like an Afro samurai thing.
Secret ending. Afro was blind the whole time. Ninja. See, I would definitely dig on that. Like the blind samurai movie, but he has the dude who simply can't fight, whose entire job is like, asshole coming in 17 degrees to the right, another asshole 12 degrees to the left, third asshole dropping directly on you from the ceiling. I think he's a ninja. Oh god! Like, you know?
Almost like a parrot on the shoulder, but it's another dude.
Or you could do it with the parrot on the shoulder. Like,
that might even be better. But it'd be a little bit out of place for a samurai flick.
Yeah, the pirate samurai. I mean, they've done enough fucking crossovers now. Ghost Dog, The Way of the Samurai. Have you seen that?
Oh.
It stars, I think it's Forrest Whitaker. Like, it's somebody good.
Wow.
It's terrible. It's like terrible. It's almost Samurai Avenger, The Blind Wolf bad. It's not quite that bad. Did you see that?
No, there's a lot of bad samurai and kung fu movies that many of them have redeeming qualities that I need to see for the bad and the good.
No, I can feel that.
But I've been sadly lacking in that department.
Well, if you're going to start, you should start with the Zatoichi films. Because the first Zatoichi film, sweet. Like, truly a well-made film. The characters are fully fleshed out. It's a really interesting concept. There's this whole building brotherhood between the main character and the guy he ends up having to kill at the end. And it's this whole interesting build-up of, like, what it means to be a warrior. And then all of the other ones are, like, copy pasta of the first one, designed around badass blind swordsman. So instead of it being like this crazy build-up to every time he draws his sword, he just kills lots of people. And
that's great.
He's non-stop. I mean, they're fun, shitty-ass
Clearly, this is
films,
what people liked about the first film, so let's do it 7 more times.
Make that 150. They made like 150 Zatoichi films, and that's not a joke.
Sure. So, I have a very serious question to ask you.
Yes.
The first Zatoichi film, is it better than Citizen Kane?
No. It's not better. I don't know that it's worse.
I was going to say, I'm also not sure that it's worse. They're on par.
Honestly, I mean, I'd have to say probably Citizen Kane tops it for me, because Zatoichi didn't do anything, daring with the film work. I mean, there's definitely some interesting camera work in it, but it's relatively standard for the time period in which it came out in Japanese cinema. Citizen Kane was obviously a serious departure from the kind of shit that you have from that same period.
Right.
I mean, even somewhat daring films of that same era just did not have the kind of active camera work, weird crazy shit. I mean, all the stuff in Xanadu was obviously crazy spaced out sets that they built in a warehouse somewhere and were lighting to make them feel like this crazy alienated fiction world, which was so beautifully done. Hearst Castle, Florida. But yeah, I guess I'd say Citizen Kane is better.
Okay.
It's simply for its innovation. If nothing else. I think Zatoichi actually had more consistent writing. In terms of the dialogue.
Probably. I would hope so. I mean, again, the whole disjointed nature that this was written in.
Yeah. Which, I think a certain amount of that makes sense, that there were, weird gaps in, what was told, and I was fine with that. It was, specific things and that's why you won't raise him. That I was there's no way someone would say that way. There was another shot that was just one of those, long shots of his face where it's, just laugh for, 12 seconds while we slowly fade out.
Yeah.
And it was him obviously kind of going, hey! Alright, that's 3-4 seconds. Huh! Yeah, that's 3-4 more seconds. Am I done? Huh! And I was just just cut it. Just cut it.
Yeah, well, part of it too is Orson Welles ended up having major part all throughout this. But what happened with the writing process is it was split between him and Herman. And they didn't really talk because they'd gotten to a point of arguing and nitpicking. So
really?
The characters in the storyline for the most part were agreed upon. But they split and wrote 2 separate copies that were then pieced together. And basically, Orson was yeah, I like this part that I did, so that's getting in there.
Because he was the director and producer. Oh, wow. Wow, that totally makes sense.
Yep. But it's also amazing given that how coherent it is at parts. And, how much of it the I guess, through line is still very much the same.
Well, and that's something I think that definitely we can give kudos to both Orson Welles and the director of photography, whose name I marked when I was watching the film, but who's escaping me. So, director of photography of
I'm sure you're dead now.
Kane, you're probably dead, but to your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, your ancestor did a great job. But, I mean, I think that's definitely something, a feather to put in his cap in terms of what he was able to do piecing together the 2 different works. Though, it still would have been nice if they had fucking talked. Because then, yeah, I feel there are specific parts that were, weirdly inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't at all deal with the actual real, the rest of the falling out between him and Leland.
Yeah, it was very much fuck
I'm
you,
drunk
blah,
and
blah, blah.
I want to go to Chicago. Yeah, for sure, man. You can go to Chicago. Okay, I love you, man. Bye. I was the end of that scene, and I was okay. And then the next scene with them is haven't talked in years. Well, that last scene certainly didn't indicate a friendship breaking.
Well, I think it was just Leland being upset with you've sold out. You're not even pretending to be a man of the people. It's about you. It's about the political and social control you're able to have with this paper. I still love you, but I don't want to be around you because I don't want to see this aspect of you, which is why he Superman's off.
Well, I total agreement. But I feel and I think that it also is significant because it's the departure of Kane's only checking voice. Right. It's the only checking voice that he actually respects.
Right.
But, like, they don't deal with that. And he hasn't even really sold out at that point. Like, literally all he said at that point is he's like, okay, the people didn't want me, so I'm not going to run again. Which is actually, a relatively mature thing to say, all things considered. It's not like, no, they need me, I'm going to keep running, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to...
Well, like... I mean, again...
Because he does refuse to drop out of the race.
Yeah.
He's like, no, fuck it, my personal life doesn't matter.
Right.
Like,
right.
I am trying to fight for the common man. And, even if at that point, which is something interesting to me, is that they didn't at all deal with when he was exploiting the workers, which was an issue within, Hearst's empire, and was part of the issue of why the fictional Kane was demonized at the end of his life, was that he was anti-union, but they never actually explain, because he's like super pro-union the whole film. But in that scene, Leland is like, oh boy, when those unions get together, you're not going to like it. And it was like, but he's now, like, there were just some weird inconsistencies specifically with that relationship that were kind of frustrating to me. Because, like, I feel like just a hair more material or something would have made that transition better. And I feel like that might have been a gap between the two scripts.
Right, and the other thing, too, is just in terms of how it was done, having these very encapsulated moments when you're speaking to different people didn't necessarily allow for that, I think, too. Granted, that's not necessarily a fair way to get around with it, since it's,
Well, I mean, like, I'm okay with there not being details there.
Right.
Because of the fact that there's supposed to be, at the end, all these unanswered questions of why did he do this? Why was it this way? But he's literally talking to Joseph fucking Cotton in the old folks' home. Like, he can't be like, so why didn't you talk for 2 years? And have 2 lines of him, like, bullshit equivocating.
Well, the other thing, too,
but that's something I would have asked.
Well, yeah.
Joseph fucking Cotton.
The other thing, too, throughout this whole thing is that you kind of get the idea that the reporter dude doesn't really give a shit. He's mostly after the, what does Rosebud mean? What does Rosebud mean? What does Rosebud mean? Because, like, there's all these other people that have interesting, important things to tell him about Charles Foster Kane, and he just doesn't give... I mean, even the shit at the end with the butler, when, like, the butler's, like, telling him the other story about, Rosebud. Yeah. The only other time he's heard them say that, I was like, well, like, you have any other questions for me? Like, you can
keep asking questions about it.
And he just fucking walks away.
Well, because at that point, he's so tired of trying to deal with all this. But yeah, no, I can definitely see what you're saying, that reporter didn't give a damn.
Yeah.
Though, I don't know why he didn't draw the conclusion, which I think the point is that he really is a real reporter, and he doesn't know the answer, so he won't publish some trumped-up answer. But, that definitely sounds like something if your editor is telling you to, like, essentially muckrake and figure out what Rosebud might mean. If, right when his wife left him, he smashed all of her stuff, except for a snow globe she kept on her dressing table, and stared at it and went, Rosebud, and wept and walked away, you might logically draw the conclusion that it's the ex-wife, and you could publish a whole thing about that's what broke him, and wah, 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 wah. Ta, rah, rah, boom, da. Like, what? What? You just like my use of traditional British pub songs? I don't know. Which, I think that was a little bit of the reporter just being like, you missed the train there, bud. You seriously missed the train. Though it could also have been him just straight not believing the butler.
That's true.
Because the butler was like, so I hear you might know. Like, well, how much is it worth to you? I don't know. Is it worth $1,000? I guess. Dog, I'm here on a paycheck. They're about to start paying for my flights. Like, I'm taking pictures and I'm taking a train home because it's cheaper. Like, I guess this is before commercial airfare or air travel. I guess there was some.
There would have been some.
Indiana Jones was taking planes places
very much
30s.
very much train was the way to go at the time.
Yeah.
It was still both the economic and the luxury thing to do.
Yeah, and speed.
Yeah.
It was all of them. My God, all of them were trained for a while. God, I was actually listening to the lyrics, this is total non sequitur, listening to the lyrics of James Brown's It's a Man's World the other day, and I was literally just like, this is shocking. This is truly shocking that anyone still plays this. It's literally, men have done everything important in history. We still need you women. Creepy, James.
Well,
like,
he had
A, historically inaccurate, and B, creepy as shit, James.
He had some weird holes in his
Terrible
character.
man.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Awful to his bands and awful to the women he was with.
That's a very blunt way of putting
Awful
all
to
things
his
that I was
family.
going to say. Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Crack cocaine. Maybe just normal cocaine. I don't know what his preferences were.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
It is, and you can see it in his face. Living in America. Back to the thing. I'm sorry, that was inspired to me by the men built the trains line in that fucking song. I'm sorry.
For sure. Again, those awkward mental connections.
Yeah, as we've discussed before. Rosebud.
So, even before I'd seen Citizen Kane, obviously I knew about it to an extent, and I'd seen it referenced and I'd seen it parodied. And there's a bit in The Simpsons where they're in a restaurant that's supposed to have all these artifacts from Hollywood, and they go through, and one of them's like, oh, the Kane from Citizen Kane, and Lisa's like, there is no Kane in Citizen Kane, but there totally is.
Where?
And the scene with him waiting,
getting married the second time, he beats the guy with the cane.
Before that, even when he meets Susan for the first time, he totally has a cane.
Interesting.
But obviously the writers for The Simpsons have seen Citizen Kane. Yes. And they were making, both an homage and poking a little fun that, obviously Citizen Kane is not named for the cane, the object. It's named for the cane, the man.
No, usually it's like Citizen Snips, it's just Citizen Kane. Instead of claws, he has a beating stick. It's just Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, starring Orson Welles as both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'd watch it. Yeah. I'd definitely give that a shot.
At this point, we'd have to time travel to make that a reality.
Well, my mom originally spoiled it for me when I was 4 because she expected me not to remember, which was a problem that I had with.
Oh, I thought she would have expected you to have watched Citizen Kane.
Obviously, she's 4 years old. He must have gotten it right. No, my parents did not show me important.
In the
films
womb while he was gestating, he'd gained intimate
we
knowledge.
projected it through the womb onto the wall. Vibration.
Oh God, I hope that technology never exists.
Kind of horrifying. Just start advertising to the baby in the womb. That's what it'd be used for. Just
probably
terrible.
My God, my first words, I want Snickers or something like that. He said his first words today. Unfortunately, he's been sold to the corporations long before he was born.
Damn, well, just throw him in the river. Breed a new one. See if this one's resistant. For the resistance. No.
The late term abortion.
Post-birth late term abortion. Anytime you get them before, their first sexual experience, you're good,
Clearly.
Quote Venture Brothers. Forgot what we were talking about before we got off on advertising to children. Oh, spoilers on it, yeah. The ones for me were my mom spoiled it for me when I was 4 and expected me to not remember, and I remembered, and it's actually been a thing that I brought up later. Is it's we'll be talking about a movie, and I'm like, I haven't seen it, and she's like, oh good, because it has a great surprise ending, and I tell her the surprise ending, and she's like, wait, how do you know that? I'm like, you told me when I was 3 what the ending of this movie was, and she's just like, oh, crap. But the other one was, the two that spoiled it for me were that and the Family Guy episode that literally has Peter returns Citizen Kane to the video store with the whole movie recorded over after the opening scene of Rosebud and him breaking on the floor. It just cuts to his face and he goes, "It's his sled! There, see? I just saved you 2 long boobless hours." And like, you know, going in with both of those.
Oh yeah.
Well,
I think that may have actually been what I knew the bit at the end from, but I blocked it out. Not that I dislike Family Guy or anything, but it's just like, A, it's such a minor moment, and B, like, having that this disconnect with that actually having any, like, if it was from like The Simpsons and like one of their parodies, since it more directly reflected on Citizen Kane, I might have like definitely remembered it and internalized it. I mean, they do a direct parody, but like it's Mr. Burns and a teddy bear. It's not. Nice. It's not directly the same.
Yeah, you don't have that immediate. If you haven't seen Citizen Kane, you're not going to like recognize the shot order, like, which Matt Groening and all of his cohorts are wonderful at their film parody. I've always deeply enjoyed that. Deeply enjoyed. I actually went back and watched Simpsons last night because, like, you know, I talked about remembering bits from these parodies and you know, references to Citizen Kane, so I wanted to go back and revisit them, and it just made me sad. Like, the state of Simpsons then to the state of Simpsons now, and I just want it to be taken out into the pasture and be shot. It's like an old dog that needs to be put down. Like, the dog is wearing a diaper. It has cancer. It's not enjoying its life anymore.
I mean, I love The Simpsons. I'm pretty sure many of you listening have loved The Simpsons, but
I love The Simpsons under a full moon with Donald Duck and Donald Trump. Foursome. Sorry.
Well, I'm glad you have the Donalds.
Yeah. Under my belt as notches, you know. Wow. I don't know. I've not watched enough The Simpsons to really be able to give it a judge. I've watched a smattering of episodes from the entirety of its run, because every time I've tried to watch it illegally streaming online, and, you know, it's an issue because most of the episodes aren't up, and you know, I haven't had TV in a very long time, and I'm not going to buy seasons of DVDs.
Right. I wonder if I'll like The Simpsons in its entirety. Let's watch seasons 1 through 27 or whatever the fuck they're on.
Yeah, you know, like I simply cannot afford to make experimentations like this. So, which is, I guess, one of the disadvantages of not having had cable television or television at all for like 5 years. So,
well, on that delightful note, thank you for being with us.
And I'm gonna say fuck you for being with us. All right. And if you don't agree with the things that we're saying, then I very much respect your difference of opinion. And
if you haven't seen Citizen Kane yet, I'm sorry that we've thoroughly spoiled this for you.
Massively.
But I guess you knew that coming in, so that's on you.
Anyway, thank you all. I didn't mean what I said before. I love you. Don't go fuck yourselves. And we'll see you next time on TBD, Two Big Dudes podcast, where we'll be discussing what? Michael Kane?
Yeah, Michael Kane.
Michael Kane. We want to keep the Canes going. So, good night. Good luck. Good riddance.